Good evening. Good evening. Oh my goodness. Good morning, committee members. This morning I will need to open the meeting given that our chair resigned last meeting, and I'll need to seek leave of the meeting to appoint an acting chair for this meeting. So do I declare it open and then seek leave of the members to appoint chair? I've spoken to Mark, who's prepared to take on that role for us today if the committee sees fit.
We're both in agreement. I agree.
Thank you. My duties are done.
Good night.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Audit and Risk Committee of the City of Adelaide. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. We acknowledge and honour their spiritual and cultural stewardship of this country and recognise their deep and enduring relationship with its lands, waters, the sky and all living things. We pay our respects to Kaurna elders, past and present, and recognise the important role of emerging leaders in sustaining and strengthening culture. Apologies and leave of absence. We have a leave of absence from Councillor Giles. So Councillor Martin will be attending in Councillor Giles' place. Confirmation of minutes. Oh, okay. So we also, the Lord Mayor is also an apology. Confirmation of minutes. We have a copy of the minutes from the previous meeting held on the 22nd of May. Can I have a mover that they be taken as read and be confirmed as an accurate record of proceedings? Councillor Martin, seconded by John. Thank you. All those in favour? That's carried. All right, does anyone have a conflict of interest that they'd like to declare? No, okay. All right, moving on to reports. I'd like to seek leave that we move item 6.3, internal audit scopes, to be the first item of the day. Move John, seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favour? Thank you. All right, let's move on to internal audit scopes. Who would like to talk to this?
Thank you, through the chair. I don't really have any meaningful introduction to this one, so I might just hand straight over to Peter and Beck. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So, as you can see, we're pushing ahead with the internal audit progress. This is the commercial revenue and process review. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but happy to hand over to Peter to expand on that or take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Beck, and good morning, Chair and committee members. So the commercial revenue process review is something that, or an internal audit that came up through scoping for the internal audit plan last year. One of the reasons it came up was that in Council's strategic plan, there's an objective to diversify revenue streams. So this, in essence, will assess how Council goes about addressing that objective. Probably important to note, it's about looking at the process and the structure around it. So what are the objectives and drivers around identification of commercial revenue streams? Does it filter down to people's personal scorecards, etc.? And then what is the process and the consistency of the process then for evaluating those revenue streams and the potential revenue streams. So how are they qualified? Do we do business cases around them? How do we consider risks, regulatory implications? How do we consider the profitability of them? How rigorous is that process? And what's the governance around that process? And how is our progress against the pursuits governed and measured and reported? So, so it should be a reasonably in-depth review over it. And hopefully out of the other end, we've got some improvements that we can suggest to council to make. And that's all I'll say. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for clarifying, about the scope and the process. The only thing I had to comment or add to it, in case it's not already within the scope and it may already be, is just to factor in, because it's commercial activities, that competition policy and competitive neutrality, assessment and practices are considered as part of the scope. But otherwise, the rest of it I was really happy with. Just excellent. That's the only bit I thought to add in.
Certainly, thank you. That will be considered as part of the, I suppose, regulatory landscape and constraints that we've got, because we understand that it is council and we pursue these revenue streams and it has maybe a mitigating impact on rates that might get charged through, but also we've got constraints with respect, or council's got constraints with respect to what it might pursue because of things like competitive neutrality, but there's also other regulations out there that might mean that you're unable to pursue. So we'll consider that as part of this. Yeah.
Other questions? Just a couple of comments. I guess, I'm interested to see how the council assesses the risk around pursuing these alternative revenue sources, and whether there's, what sort of, are we doing business cases or how are we evaluating that? I can see you've covered that. The other thing, I guess, is, is there any sort of overarching guidance? Do we have a strategy or policy or guidelines that actually help guide how we pursue these across the organisation, thinking that they're spread, it's a very large organisation with potentially many opportunities. So how do we sort of consistently, pursue those in a way that takes care of all that? So I guess I'm interested to see what comes out in terms of providing better guidance to officers across the organisation. But I thought a very interesting review. I haven't seen one of these ones before, so we'll be interested to see what comes out of that. All right, we have a recommendation that we note the internal audit scope. I think we're happy to take the feedback verbally. Yeah. So would someone like to move that recommendation? Thank you, John. Move, John. Seconded by Councillor Martin. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, well, I segue to the meeting that we now bring forward item 6.2, which is the interim report on the external audit. Just do a show of hands, I think, on that. Yes. Thank you, Tim. Anthony, did you make any comments? Or?
Through the chair, this is part of the course for undertaking our external audit. It's just one step in the process to achieving sign-off on our annual financial statements. Happy again just to, I guess, hand over to Tim and Mitch and Nicole for anything they might want to add before we open up for questions.
All right. Oh, there we go. Someone's done it for me. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for having me. And this is my first time presenting the actual audit findings to the committee. So a bit of a milestone for me. So I think firstly to say, look, it's the format of our report might be a bit different to what you've seen in the past. And perhaps one of the things that might seemed to be the case initially is that it's quite, it's quite a lengthy report compared to what you might have seen in the past, and there's some reasons for that. Number one is that we don't report on an exception basis. We report on a more holistic basis than is traditional for external audit reports, and so as a result, the interim report that we're providing here is focused on your internal financial controls, which then supports our internal financial controls opinion. And we give you the results of everything that we've looked at. So all 92 controls, we give you the, whether if it's working effectively, we tell you that it's working effectively. If it's not working 100% effectively, then we'll tell you everything that we've observed about that control, whether it be a low risk, a high risk, or just an opportunity for better practice. So as a result, we tend to have longer reports than might be traditional. So that shouldn't be a cause for alarm in any sense. It's actually a very good result. So the vast majority of controls that we reviewed were operating effectively, and those where there was opportunities to do things better, there were no high risk observations. So there was nothing that we noted that would put your internal controls opinion under threat. And quite a number of the controls were, very much in that better practice opportunity category or low risk category, which are sort of similar. The low risk ones are things where you might choose not to even address those necessarily. There's going to be a cost benefit consideration in addressing those. That said, we do consider that before we raise issues. So we won't raise an issue if we don't believe that there's a cost benefit in doing it. For these lower risk findings, we think there's some pretty simple little solutions that can be put in place where the cost benefit is there, but that's ultimately a decision for the council. And similarly, even in the moderate risk category, there's going to be cases where council might decide that they don't want to pursue a particular recommendation for cost benefit reasons or capacity reasons, or maybe it's just let's push that a bit further down the road. So there's little here that would be of things that need to be immediately addressed. So I liken this report to like having a building inspection on a house. When you buy a property, you'll get a building inspector in and they'll come along and they'll always find something. There'll be some leaky pipes, or a room needs repainting, whatever it might be, but it doesn't mean that it's not a darn fine house and that you shouldn't buy it. And similarly here, when we come in and do a review of your internal controls, you're always going to find something. Internal financial controls are not a static concept. They're always in a state of flux. There's always new staff coming on board, new legislation coming out, new systems and processes and updates. Things change. We're not in a static environment. And so there's always going to be moving parts that mean that things aren't expected to operate 100% all of the time. But what we look for in a good controls environment is that there's mechanisms in place to detect when things might fall behind or aren't operating 100%, and that gets acknowledged and action plans get put into place to address those things in a reasonable time frame. So overall, a really strong result. In terms of the findings themselves, I'm not sure that I'll take the report as read. Again, because there's no high-risk findings, I don't feel the particular need to pull out any individual findings for discussion from my perspective. So I might leave that in the hands of the committee if there's particular findings that you'd like to unpack a little further. And then very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Tim. Questions? Yes, John.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks. It is as you said, a very comprehensive report. And it's also good to know that there's no high-risk items or matters that are going to impact the audit opinion at this stage. I just wanted to get to some further detail on the comments on page, 6 of your report or 52 of the agenda, where it talks about the demonstrating continued progress. Can you just expand on that just a little bit as to what progress you're looking there from the external audit perspective to keep that unmodified audit opinion status?
Absolutely, John, and it's actually an excellent question. 'Cause, yeah, it's a comment that's sort of tucked away in the report there. And look, it's a generic comment that applies in the context that our opinion on internal financial controls is not at a point in time, but it covers the entire period from 1 July to 30 June. So we've done the interim audit earlier in the year, and so there's still several months of time to elapse before we have to actually give our opinion. So if things fall apart in those few months, then that could negatively impact on the opinion. So when we come back and do our final audit, we will do a bit of a refresh and just make sure that things have continued as they are. There's also certain internal controls which are only performed at year-end, year-end reconciliations. The revaluation is a good example here where that's we've flagged that as at interim. There's still work to be done, but there's also a plan in place to do that work and have it in place by year-end or by the time we have to sign off on the financial statements. So if that happens, then everyone's happy, and that would be an effective control. So that's really what it's about. It's about recognising that our opinion spans the whole financial year, not just a point in time.
And just one other question. In relation to finding 2.1.1, and this may be a question more for the administration, but in relation to the capitalisation of overheads, I just want to clarify that whether or not there's a requirement or a need to review the method of that calculation. Is there any risk that will change for FY26 or in future, or is this more just a case of just documenting the actual method itself in terms of that control itself?
Thank you, through the chair. We're in the process of obtaining sufficient supporting evidence to suggest that the current calculation is correct and material, so we're not expecting any changes for the FY26, and we will continue to work on the overall capitalisation of delivery resources in the 26-27 financial year.
Councillor Martin, did you?
No, I look likewise. I was interested in 2.1 and also in 2.1.3, and my questions have been partially answered there. But I'd just like to say that commenting further on the manner in which the report is set out, yes, it is different, and I find it so much more readable than some of the other documents we're presented with. Extensive though it is, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I had the same question as John, noting that, by exception, there's 20 controls that are not operating effectively. So I was just wondering what the council needed to demonstrate by the time that the audit's completed. So I think, as I understand it, you're looking, when you come back, you're looking that the administration's actually started to progress towards addressing these. So do you need to come back and tick off on 20 more? So we've got 92 operating effectively, or is it just enough to see that something's been done about those?
That's right. So no, we certainly don't need to see that all 20 things have been addressed. Any sort of progress towards improvement would be welcome. Because there's no high risk findings in there, to be honest, even if nothing had changed, it would still be an unmodified opinion, provided that things haven't deteriorated. But certainly when we come back in 12 months' time, I would hope to see some strong progress towards the findings where the administration has agreed to address them. And yes, it's more about those one-off annual controls, or again not wanting to see any deterioration in controls over those last few months of the year, which I'm not expecting.
Right, thank you. And I note that there's 17 IT general controls that were assessed, and we're going to consider them in the confidential part of the meeting. So we've got a recommendation there to note the interim report. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Councillor Giles, seconded by John. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, Councillor Martin. We'll get there. Thank you. That's carried. Thank you. All right. So I think we're looking for leave again to move the confidential section forward, section 11. So just a show of hands that you're happy to do that. Yes. All right. Yes, so we've got a motion to move into confidence. Would someone like to move it? Councillor Martin, second by John. All those in favour? Okay, that's carried. In regard to item 11.2, moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by John. All those in favour? Okay, so now. So just open the door, let all the public back in. I think this is the last one. It is. This is it. All right. And well, we've left the best to last, Anthony. A little workshop on the long-term financial plan, which I've really appreciated in the past. So I'll hand over to you to run through that with the committee.
Yeah, through the chair again. I won't labour the introduction, but this is, I guess, the first step in kicking off the process to update the 26-27 LTFP for the next coming 10 years. So I'm just going to hand straight over to Mitch and Nicole to take you through the presentation.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, committee members. We don't have the long-term financial plan itself to go through today, so today's workshop is to get your views on some of those assumptions and drivers behind the plan, so that we can then go forth and build the plan. In terms of our roadmap, it's a little bit shortened compared to other years. The practice here at City of Adelaide is that we adopt the budget and then we come back and we use that adopted budget as the base for our long-term financial plan. There's usually a lot more room to move, but given the date of the election and the caretaker period, there's a need to sort of bring that time period in a lot more than usual. The legislation requires that the update of the plan needs to involve public consultation, so we do need to take it to council and get it out into the public arena for the community to have some feedback. It is a significant decision of council, so we've ascertained whether council can adopt it in a caretaker period, but we've decided the current roadmap is to have it adopted before council goes into caretaker period. Having said that, it's the long-term financial plan itself hasn't undergone a massive transformation since it was adopted last November. More of that updating of the parameters and some of those things that were adopted in the budget. So some of the key discussion points that we're asking the committee's views of here today, one is on the targeted operating surplus approach that we have with the plan. Another one is the assumptions that we're proposing to use in the plan, and also the view on council's path to achieving that 100% asset renewal funding ratio. So in terms of basis of preparation, like all local government long-term financial plans, the plan draws on the long-term city plan 2036 of council, the shorter-term strategic plan, all of our asset management plans, and also our other adopted strategies and plans. And then it also takes into consideration community expectations, capacity to pay by the community as well, our guiding financial principles, our prudential borrowing limits, and also some of those key assumptions as well. Some of the other matters that we take into consideration are those revenue and expenditure levers that council has. Although not many, but it does have a few that it can utilise to achieve its goals and its financial sustainability. The long-term financial plan it's built around four funding components. So the four areas that we're looking at is our operating budget, so funding our operating budget, which also includes our debt servicing obligations. We want to be funding our strategic projects, which isn't necessarily our capital projects, but it's those of an operating nature, things like upgrades to our fuel management systems, GIS upgrades, our resilient flood planning, those type of things. There's a bit more of a list here a little bit later on. But also funding our asset renewal obligations and also funding our new and capital upgrade components as well. So what our long-term financial plan does is that it sets those parameters for our annual development of our annual budget and business plan. So in terms of our operating budget, there it is for the 26-27 financial year. So there's obviously a lot that goes into our operating budget, and there's many factors within each of those, and there's a lot of drivers around each of those. There's a lot of sensitivities around each of those elements, and they're the things that we look at when we're determining that model that underpins the overall financial plan. I'll just let Nicole elaborate a little bit more on that one.
So just to add to the slide, what this slide is doing is it's comparing the current draft budget, which hopefully will be endorsed in a fortnight's time, against what the 26-27 parameters were in the current adopted long-term financial plan. So as you can see around our operating surplus, the operating surplus for the draft budget is 4976, which is $1.4 million favourable to the long-term financial plan. So going into the 26-27 long-term financial plan, we're already, from an operating position, in a better position going forward. Our net outlays on existing capital assets, again, has had a slight movement, and that is a result of the timing of Main Street. So in moving out the Main Streets in terms of delivery has had an impact on the renewal program, and likely that has also had an impact on the new and upgrade program as well. So those timings of the Main Streets is what's driven the changes to both the renewals and the new and upgrade assets. That has then transpired into a more favourable borrowings position in 26-27 compared to what the long-term financial plan projection was. So we will use the draft budget, hopefully soon to be the adopted budget, as the basis for the 26-27 long-term financial plan. So we should see a more favourable outcome over the 10-year horizon.
Sorry, Nicole, just refresh my memory as well. Central market, the assumption in there is probably slightly different as well in terms of what we had assumed, and which is probably giving rise to some of those increase in materials, contracts, other expenses?
A small portion of it, and also there was an increase in strategic project funding to deliver on our strategies and plans.
So I suppose what that's also saying is that the parameters that we've got set in our existing long-term financial plan are resulting in some healthy results, given that we've been able to improve our situation in terms of our adopted budget. In terms of that operating budget, there are a few key assumptions that we do make. So one of those is that we're maintaining our existing service delivery to the community, and that is as per our adopted 26-27 draft budget. So there's no vast increase and there's no decrease in those levels. We're maintaining an appropriate operating surplus, so nothing that is an enormous surplus, but also not generating any deficits throughout the plan. We're aligning our rate revenue increases with our expenditure growth, so making sure that we are living within our means and making sure that we are taking up that increase each year to make sure that we can, as the 2 points above, continuing to deliver those services at the levels and maintain that surplus. We've got some key assumptions in there around inflation and interest charges. So whilst we do have a fair bit of control over our service delivery, our operating services and that alignment, those inflation and interest charges are something that we do need to go external to get those assumptions. So you'll see in the next slide, just quickly flick to that one. These are those assumptions on inflation and interest rates. So we've we get these from the South Australia Centre for Economics, so the SACES, I think it's termed, which is a pretty common practice throughout South Australia local government, and also the inflation, the interest rates that we get from the RBA as well. So we're making sure that we're using the assumptions that are coming from some reputable sources. They're very similar to the ones that were contained within the state budget that was released last week. So that gives us some comfort as well that we're using the same as the state government. Is there any feedback that the committee members have on this approach and the sources that we're using in terms of these assumptions?
Questions?
In terms of the inflation targets and what's being applied, does council track or have available data which it compares its own, say, cost movements over different cost drivers compared to that of historical CPI to see if you're within that range or if it's the most appropriate metric for all your cost drivers?
We have that data. We haven't been doing that comparison, but it's probably something that we can take on board and contain within that sensitivity component of the long-term financial plan. So there's definitely something that we can undertake.
Yeah, because I think it'll be interesting to see how that historically is compared across different cost drivers if you're looking at that, because sometimes CPI may be the appropriate or maybe not, but as a general rule, I appreciate that that's the assumption, but it'll be interesting to see if you've got that data.
Through the chair, where that does become problematical, I've found in local government, is that we tend to add services, and so it can distort the growth in expenditure versus some of those key drivers behind it. But I think we'll try and do the best we can to analyse that.
Completely understand. Yeah, there's two elements to it. One is the actual the price driver, the economic one, versus the actual volume, and absolutely so. And adjusted for that, correct? Yeah, absolutely. I'll take that.
I know it's retrospective, but what is the local government price index?
I will look that up as we continue, and I'll provide a response.
Through the chair, the March CPI, our GPI forecast was 3.4% for 25-26. Our GPI for Adelaide.
I think that's a good point. One of the other councils that chair the audit committee that's sort of broken up their expenditure into sort of different categories. So clearly there are things that just move with the CPI, and some of those are contracts and things. But then utilities, they separate that out, and a couple of other items, and also of course the cost of capital expenditure tends to go up at a lot higher rate at CPI. So they've also sort of brought that out as well. So something to consider, in terms of putting the document together about do we. Being clear about which things we're going to align with CPI and which things we might align with something that's sort of a bit higher, I think would be good.
Through the chair, just to add to that, we do that. So when we are revaluing between formal revaluations, we use our GPI for the capital perspective for our asset valuations, and then that forms the basis for what we are inflating our renewal and our AMP within the long-term financial plan. So we are using different sources, which we can add to that going forward, just to show where we are using different sources.
Through the chair, the LPGI is also broken down between capital and operating these days as well. So they give us an understanding of what the operating environment is like for across the sector in addition to that capital as well. So we'll definitely take those into account. And I think you may recall during the budget discussion, we did go through and identify where the rise and fall is in contracts that relates to CPI. We then put a handbrake on everything else to the 2.5% that we had as the original assumption. However, we also took into account, like you've identified, that utilities and insurances and other costs tend to increase by much higher than CPI.
Yes,
So does that mean the administration has actually factored in those higher percentage increases in things like utilities within the ultimate decision to increase rates by 5.6%? Look, I have the philosophical questions I have, you're forgiven. One of the slides we talk about the levers available to council to deliver new and upgraded assets, surplus cash from operating and renewal activities. Is that part of our policy? Because I always understood that the funding of new and upgraded assets were generally always from borrowings. Is there a policy that says surplus cash from operating and renewal goes towards that or to some other area, or is it silent?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's silent on that. However, we'll take that on notice and come back as well. However, the current practice, whether it's in policy or not, is to use debt to fund new and upgrade, and like you pointed out, to fund renewals. We do that purely through our operating revenues. Noting that 2 years ago, council, we did, when we updated the AMPs, there was a gap between what we had allowed in the budget and long-term financial and what we needed to spend, and we borrowed on a short-term basis of that, which also makes up part of the 5.6% rate increase at the moment, where we took some debt for 3 years to fund the cash component of those renewals, and we sought to, I guess, recoup that through increasing rates over a 3-year period to do so.
And look, I had one more question. It is, or has been, a bit of a political question in terms of the surplus that is proposed for 26-27 and moving forward. We are talking about something less than 2% in a range recommended by the Local Government Association of between 0 and 20%. Have we got a policy setting that says it should be 5%, or it should be determined by debt and in lockstep with that, or it's just something ground we've not traversed?
Through the chair, no, there's no hard set rules around what that target should be, so long as we're staying within the adopted range within our prudential or the KPIs that we've set ourselves. I think, just to be clear, I think the local government is 0 to 10%, I think, is their target. The City of Adelaide has chosen 0 to 20%, I believe.
So through the chair, 0 to 15% is through the LGA. Yeah.
But also, just on that point, I think when we put the final budget to committee on Tuesday night, we will be flagging that 1.8% does start to head towards a more risky position than we've been in the past in terms of our sustainability.
But it doesn't leave much wriggle room, does it?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion around the surplus. I think, we need to set a target that's appropriate to the council. So for, small rural councils, just 0 would be pretty good, break even. But for, Mount Barker, where I sit on the audit committee, where they've got a large amount of growth happening, of course they're running surpluses, but they need to do that because they've got to fund future community infrastructure. It's obviously appropriate for the City of Adelaide to have a surplus, again, to give you some wriggle room and also to help fund a lot of the new things that you're wanting to do. Otherwise, if we don't run a surplus, then we're just entirely reliant on debt, and I guess, eventually, we'll hit a debt ceiling and we can't do anything. So.
Through the chair, on that point around the growth in Mount Barker, City of Adelaide also has significant growth aspirations to get us to 50,000 residents by 2036. So again, like you're saying, with that comes that, I guess, that expectation around the service delivery and maintaining that for a larger population. Thanks.
Thank you.
So staying on operating surplus, so certainly as the discussion said, without that operating surplus, there's no ability to fund asset renewals or servicing debt. The approach we have here at the city is a targeted operating surplus, so making sure that we can fund our operating budget, our strategic projects, our asset renewals, and our debt servicing, new and existing, and also funding 1.5% rate equivalent to the new community buildings in the parklands. So that targeted operating surplus that we do have, we've applied that to the plan, or will be applying that to the plan to make sure that each year of the plan that we know what our target operating surplus is, that will allow us enough funding to apply to those asset renewals and the debt servicing from those borrowings for the new and upgraded assets. Did you have something to add?
No. I was just going to, through the chair, add that in relation to just following on from Councillor Martin's point around the 26-27 budget, is that the original targeted operating position was higher, but noting that we are investing in Central Market as a bit of a one-off as they expand, is sort of not with therefore, and the decision to do the small business program has reduced the operating position for the financial year. Going forward, as we then maintain and continue to deliver and open up the Central Market, you will see that the operating position and targeted operating position will be higher, and therefore above the 1.8%.
Just to clarify what Nicole's saying is that the Central Market, because we are only expecting to get half a year's revenue, we'll have the half year's operating costs associated, but we've got a significant investment to get the market up and running and launched hopefully in the first half of the year. That's giving us a one-off loss that we won't be incurring moving forward once the market's fully up and running.
And the item there that the growth from our rate revenue has been incorporated into that operating. The targeted operating surplus. So we were looking to receive the committee's feedback on that approach of targeting an operating surplus or an appropriate operating surplus in each year of the plan, to make sure that those adequate levels of funding are there to like we said earlier slide, fund service delivery, debt servicing and asset renewals.
I guess I just had a comment, so I think, Nicole, I'm going to stand corrected. I think it's 0 to 10%. I think I'll just quickly, because they change it every now and again, but I stand to be corrected on that one. In terms of the targeted operating surpluses, and this is probably like everything with LTFPs, they get intertwined with other assumptions, but I noticed that for a number of years that the asset renewal funding ratio has been less than 100%. So in terms of catching up, or to get to that target at 100%, have we got a backlog at the moment as well within the LTFP to catch up on those years where we've been under the 100%, of which the council's then looking to apply a portion of operating surpluses to do that catch up and factor that in?
Well, through the chair, John, when that predicament was explained to council, council did take the step to rectify some of those lower ratios in the past, and have taken the step of over an 8-year period to get us back to 100%. In the interim, noting that we're probably not at 100%, what the assets team does is it reviews on a regular basis which assets we can sweat and which we can't. So we're still maintaining our assets to the level we need, but we might be deferring and pushing out others that haven't actually deteriorated to the point theoretically in terms of condition assessment. So we run those condition assessments. We continually make sure that we're not running the assets down and still heading, towards that 100%. We chose 8 years as an organisation because we didn't want to have a huge impost on our ratepayers on a short-term basis. So it's more difficult for the asset team to manage on that regard, but from a ratepayer perspective, it's a much better outcome.
No, I appreciate that. So in terms of them looking at the asset service standards, are we saying that those service standards at the moment are the optimal asset service standards, or are we, from a funding point of view, because if we're able to maintain them and still that's satisfactory, how are we then setting those asset service standards within let's say from a planning context?
Yeah, through the chair. We've already started internally having discussions around when the next chamber's elected to start having a look at those service standards, so that the council members are really clear about what it is that we've agreed to deliver. And through that process, we'll analyse whether we're high, low, at the right mark or not, I think. One of the things I've discovered since I've been at City of Adelaide, which I didn't take for granted, is some of our roads and other infrastructure has to be maintained at a higher level than other councils, because we have buses running through it on a regular basis. So there is a higher cost to the City of Adelaide to maintain its assets, but we also have to build them to higher standards as well. So we'll be undertaking all that analysis leading up into the election of the new chamber, so that we can actually very early on take the council members through it, so they've got a really good understanding of the service levels.
So were you seeking some feedback on the operating surplus target? Because I just tried to find the targets, but they're not in there. So what is our operating surplus target at the moment?
Through the chair, it's more that principle about ensuring that the target operating surplus covers these key components, and because they will vary year on year in terms of the 1.5% funding for community buildings. Again, we need to match that back principally to the condition of some of those community buildings we want to upgrade and maintain. So there is variability from year to year across some of those items, but it's more ensuring that is the target operating surplus the best way for us to, to maintain sustainability into the future, or is there another way that we could consider?
Comments? I guess, I agree with those. I mean, and it might be interesting when we do get a draft, you might want to do a bit of a reconciliation to say, well, this is what the surplus is and this is how it's going to be used. And that might be good information for the council as well. Is there a better way? Well, I think we should always back it up with cash, because, at the end of the day, cash is king, and sometimes there can be a disconnect, because remembering, we're using our asset management plans to drive our asset renewal effort, which may or may not line up directly with depreciation, which is sitting in the operating statement. So I guess a bit of a check back to that. And I think you do have a separate ratio that looks at that. Yeah, so I certainly agree with that, but I think we need to line that up with what's actually happening from a cash point of view as well. Did you have any other comments, Tom?
No, I agree, Mark. And I guess the other thing is, with the absence of not seeing the LTFP from the current one, is based upon these say principles as to what limit, depending on what surplus you have and repayment or maintenance of debt, what capacity do you have for other projects throughout the life of the LTFP as well? Because I think that's also another key consideration as to what drives your your financial targets there.
I think that's why maintaining an operating surplus is so important, because that is producing that cash for the renewals and other things. So making sure that those are maintained. My view is that the long-term financial plan is a tool for decision making. So making sure that the operating targeted operating surpluses can be demonstrated, so that when those decisions are being made which have a financial impact, that they can see how that's impacting the targeted operating surplus, especially when the messaging is that the targeted operating surplus has been created to make sure that we are funding services, we are funding asset renewals, and we are funding our debt.
Through the chair, the other thing I just want to pick up on what the chair said around cash position and cash management. I think that's why I think we place quite a bit of importance on that cash flow from operations remaining positive, because, again, since moving from commercial world into council, accounting for profit doesn't quite align for me in terms of what we do as an organisation, and cash is more important, I think. And I mean, that becomes particularly evident when we get a cash grant that we have to recognise as P&L that actually, makes our operating position, fluctuate. It doesn't really give a true picture, but I think that cash position really is, because that's what we need to generate to maintain our assets. So whilst we are bound from a statutory sense to report P&L, that cash operating position is really important as well.
Yeah, I think, and if you look at the statement of cash flow, you can clearly see, we've got this much cash surplus from our operations to fund investment in assets and service our debt. So it is a much clearer picture, I agree. Well, John alerted me, was it last time you alerted me that the income statement is about to look like the cash flow statement. So that will be quite an interesting transition. But again, I think it will give a better link between the current format and what the cash flow statement is. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of pans out. But I agree. I think obviously we want to maintain operating surplus, but then I think we just need to reconcile that to the cash surplus and cash management. If we can see that in a sort of a tabular form or even a graph, that would be helpful.
Yeah, through the chair, again, if I come back to the grant funding that we have to recognise as P&L, one of the things we did at Playford, which we kind of keep a look at it here, is we used to try and report the P&L impact of those below the line. And so we had in effect a structural P&L, and then we had this thing that could fluctuate based on how successful we were in getting grants and whatever. So, which was really quite helpful as well in terms of making sure structurally we were sound from an operating position.
I think the only other thing I'd add to this, because it's all, again, like I said before, it's like intertwined with everything, is especially with probably more from an operating perspective, is to know, and I'm not asking to understand this right now, but to have an appreciation of what your discretionary versus your non-discretionary spending is, because they form part of the levers that you can pull. So I think it's part of developing it, as well as cost drivers, is that it'd be interesting to see and to know that as well, that data.
All right. Our rate revenue, obviously part of our P&L. Our increases are based around CPI. We've also got, so we're talking about rate revenue increases. We're factoring in growth from new developments. We're also have our asset renewal funding ratio increase, as we discussed earlier. That increase over the 8 years up until 31-32, so that's an element of our rate increase. And also our asset renewal repair fund, which is a 3-year boost, which will go until 27, 28.
And just harking back to Councillor Martin's question, that's where our 5.6 comes from at the moment. We've assumed CPI of 3.5. We've assumed asset renewal funding ratio increase of 0.5%. And then the asset renewal repair fund is about 2.1%. That all added up to 6.1%. And then through the process, I think we explained last time in terms of increasing costs that needed to be increased by 3.5%, we did, but we've maintained all other cost base at 2.5, which found us 0.5% efficiency that we used to offset the full 6.1 to come back to 5.6%.
We spoke about the need to fund our strategic projects. So this slide here is just a bit of a breakdown of those strategic projects, which are in the 26-27 budget. You can see ACMA there is a large proportion of that, given where that is at the moment. Our economic development strategy as well is a large component.
Just through the chair, ACMA being the central market, that is the market preparedness, so getting ready for the market, that we don't contribute that sort of on an annual basis to that level for the central market, but given the stages that we have this year, asset management plan, we found that year on year we were asking for money around condition assessments, and we've tried to build that into our business as usual budget moving forward, because we do need to undertake that on a regular basis to ensure our asset management plans are in check. So that's just a little bit of the rationale behind those two larger amounts in there.
In terms of our asset renewal program, so we're continuing that transition to the 100% asset renewal funding ratio. We're also updating our asset management plans to incorporate the timing of our main streets projects, and also updating them for all of the asset condition data that we're updating on an ongoing basis. We're in the throes of developing our fleet management plans so that we'll have those available to implement down the track. And they're also confirming the funding assumptions around our significant renewals that we have, being the Adelaide Bridge, the Torrens Weir, and our Rundle U-Park, which we'll touch on a little bit later. This slide here we've spoke about briefly already. So this is demonstrating that transition from 92.5 to 100% over 8 years. This approach has been taken to smooth out that impact to our ratepayers, but also, I suppose, gear up, give the organisation the opportunity to gear up to be able to deliver that increase in capital program. This is another item of feedback that we sought from the committee as to the appropriateness of this approach, I suppose, in achieving this 100% benchmark.
I think it makes sense on feedback. Yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah, I mean, sorry.
I think, Anthony, you've touched on it already from previous discussions as to why and how you get into that target. Obviously, I think if you want to get there sooner, there's other levers you can pull, but that's the strategy as there is. So I appreciate you doing the asset management plans and condition assessments, so that's subject to probably further review once you do those, is what I'd probably think out of our discussion from today.
So putting a bit of quantum on that, I suppose, is this slide here, which shows the 100% value of those asset management plans at 58 million versus what we've got in the budget there at just a tick under 55. So a variance there of 6.3. So that would be the movement from 94.5 up to 100% in one given year. So. Touched on the significant renewals there just before. So the current assumptions that we have in that will be in the revised long-term financial plan are the Adelaide Bridge, Torrens Weir, and the U-Park projects. We're assuming that we're strengthening the Adelaide Bridge, the rehabilitation and increase the load capacity for vehicles only, so no trams, and also extending its life by 25 to 100 years. Rehabilitate the Weir structure and extend its life by 50 years, and then also extending the U-Park life to 29 to 2030. I suppose the that should say no grant funding as well, not now. We've taken that external funding out of the long-term financial plan in this update, or we will. I suppose that was the issue that ASCOSA had in our previous plan, was that there was a risk around that external funding and whether or not we were able to achieve or be awarded that funding, and then that should it not arrive, that we didn't have enough buffer in our plan. So we're removing that external funding, and we'll be funding it from council's own means.
Just to confirm, the removal of the external grant funding is in the current adopted long-term financial plan as well. So it was originally in the 24-25, which ASCOSA reviewed us upon, and the 25-26 update excluded, and is based on these assumptions presented today.
So I was just looking at the language. So we're now talking about extending all these things. So is that a change in language in terms of, because before, well, I'm not sure where we were. We had different views about each of those.
Yeah, through the chair, what the asset management plans assumed before was, I guess, purist in that we were going to replace those assets at the end of their useful life. And you may recall, I think we had about $60 million in there for the Adelaide Bridge. We've undertaken significant studies on the bridge itself, and there were 4 options that we had available to us. One was just extending it to some degree, but maintaining existing capacity on that bridge. The second option was extending the life of it, but allowing, I guess, the largest type vehicles that need to traverse that particularly fire trucks and other things that can't go across it at the moment. And then the other 2 options we're looking at extending it and increasing capacity to carry a tram, but we have no aspirations at this point in time to fund a tram across there. And the fourth option was to replace it fully, which is 120 million off the top of my head or something. So what we've taken is, I guess, is a mid path that I guess benefits the users of the city without actually having to fund a tram to North Adelaide. If that eventuates, I imagine we would work with the state government on that if that becomes something of reality. The Torrens Weir structure was similar. The original AMP had the full replacement of that. Again, we've undertaken significant studies on that, and we believe that we can mitigate the need to fully replace that by looking at other methods to extend its life. And the Rundle U Park, we're looking to extend that. A lot of the agreements we have in place expire around that 29-30 mark. In the interim, we will be working with council to look at what we may be able to do with that site moving forward once that does come to the end of its useful life, and that will align nicely with some of the commercial agreements we have in place there.
Yeah, I think that looks much more realistic. So those numbers are in the plan?
Correct, both in the adopted long-term financial plan and asset management plans.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Well, I think too your approach with the Adelaide Bridge is a good one, because if the state government says, well, we'd like a tram to go across there, you can say, well, you give us the money and we'll increase the load capacity to make that work. So I think that's good. So I must say I'm feeling a bit more comfortable about that, because they were always just sort of hanging out there. We sort of quantified them, but we didn't have a really good approach to them. So I think that's looking much better, and maybe that needs some good, just discussion or setting out in the long-term financial plan about the new direction.
The other strategy is we could just transfer that asset to someone else for $1 and we'd be better off.
Yeah, we did do that with that pool, didn't we?
No, it cost us.
Yeah. Well, yes, I'm sure the long-term return is better.
But that is another strategy, should that ever eventuate.
Thank you.
Which is exactly what's on this next slide with asset ownership with those significant renewals. So it's definitely one of the levers that we can pull in terms of funding the works that need to happen on these assets. Like I said, we'll certainly be advocating for grant funding regardless of what we do. like I said, determining the ownership of the assets, and then obviously what sort of borrowings we would need to undertake if we don't have the capacity to fund it without it.
Yeah, that's a good point that Mitch makes there, is that our policy is to use operating revenue to fund our renewals. Because these are significant, we think that'd be a significant impact on our community if we were asking them to fund that through operating revenue. So it makes sense for these three in particular to use debt to fund that when we get to that point.
In terms of our new and upgraded assets, so our current plan has committed funding to our Main Street revitalisation upgrades, our greening program, Flinders Street housing, the 1.5% for the upgraded buildings in parklands. There's an assumed forward borrowing commitment of $23.2 million. So that's in there to be spent, but I don't think there's projects been allocated to that amount of money just yet. And there's also a commitment to the Brown Hill and Keswick Creek.
Through the chair, the assumed forward borrowing commitment. 3 or 4 years ago, I think the long-term financial plan had no assumption for any potential forward commitment, which is not the reality of any council I've ever been in. And so what we did is we definitely built in what we knew and what we were committed to. The Main Street revitalisation, there is a social commitment there to the community, whilst there are no absolute legal agreements in place for the bulk of it yet. But also then assuming that we would spend nothing on new and upgrade moving forward was not very realistic. And like Mitch said, we need to use the LTFP to assist us to make decisions, and so to have some forward commitment just made sense to us, to show us where we potentially could be, particularly in relation to our prudential limits.
In terms of the levers that we've got in terms of funding new and upgrade assets, we do have that, as Councillor Martin was discussing earlier, the surplus cash from operating and renewal activities. Whilst we have that stance that we will fund, we'll only use borrowings for new and upgraded assets. There's nothing that is silent on using other funds to fund new and upgrade assets. Again, advocating and attempting to get as much external grant funding as possible for these assets. Like I said, borrowings are one of our key funding for new and upgrades, and then prioritising our commitments around new and upgrade as well, to make sure that the projects can be delivered and funded in the right timeframes. In terms of risks and opportunities that lay before us with the long-term financial plan, our rate revenue growth. So we do have an amount of rate growth that we've factored into our assumptions, into our operating result. That also brings with it the obligations for more infrastructure and potentially increase in services. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword sometimes. There's government priorities, both state and federal, so some of those can be great opportunities for council to deliver things in partnership, or potentially those governments delivering for us. It can also put certain things in place which result in us needing to spend a little bit more money or not being able to generate the revenue. Interest rates, a little bit out of council's control. They also obviously have an impact on the cost of borrowing for us. There's inflation pressures from wages and materials. We've also, the bottom point there is the ongoing impacts of the fuel supply and distribution issues, has an impact on our inflation the inflationary pressures that council has. Securing external funding, so obviously a huge opportunity there for us to get some funding. Whether or not that lands in our favour is obviously a risk, so we try to make sure that we don't include any of that grant funding, like we've just been speaking about with the weir and the bridge, making sure that we're relatively conservative when we're applying that. We have our property strategy, so delivering on that and the opportunities for revenue generation that brings. The delivery of prioritised actions and of our endorsed strategies. So that obviously is delivering on our strategic outcomes, but it obviously will come at a price as well. Our asset valuations, the risk there, linked with that inflationary pressure as our asset valuations rise, as does our depreciation, so making sure that we can manage the impact of that. And working within our prudential borrowing limits and making sure we're well across those parameters to make sure that we're well aware of where that line is. So there's a whole heap of thought that needs to go into the plan to make sure that we're sort of testing the plan against some of these sensitivities, especially around that inflation issue, because it's such a driver for our plan.
I reckon one of the risks and opportunities also to consider in this context is also your subsidiaries, because they've got some quite significant undertakings and opportunities there as well. So I think it's worthwhile also considering those, and I'm assuming as well with all the information we looked at before, those assumptions that they're all consolidated in as well. So I think it's important then to outline it here and to consider that, not to forget it.
So that's all we wanted to run through with the committee today. Like we said, there's our roadmap. We're with you today. We're planning on running it through with the Finance and Governance Committee with workshop, getting it up to council to get out on exhibition so that the community can comment and get it back and endorsed before caretaker kicks in. Anthony?
I was just going to add, we're not looking at significant changes to the current adopted LTFP. A lot of the assumptions, particularly around the assets, are pretty much still the course for us, I think. So this is more a tweak until we get the new chamber on board, where we will have to have that go through that statutory process within the first 2 years of getting a new adopted long-term financial plan for the next chamber. However, this one is, the key update is where we're at as in terms of our 26-27 budget and how that plays out over the life of the LTFP.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hopefully you've got some good feedback there to work with, so we look forward to... So will we get an opportunity to see this again? Yeah, okay.
The 14th of August is our next committee, so we'll be able to bring it back to the committee in August. If you have any feedback that you haven't provided today that you'd like to provide, certainly happy to receive that session.
Yeah, I guess the only feedback which I sort of do give fairly regularly is those targets, just making sure that they're not, the bands aren't too big. I think when we do develop this plan and see the numbers, we need to make sure that, we're not having targets that are too wide, like let's just have an operating surplus ratio of 0 to 15 and we'll just operate within that. I think it's, maybe that's the outer limit, but we've got other, this is what we're really going to be targeting, over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Which is what you've done with the asset ratio. So yeah, that's my only comment. But I think it's looking really good. I really like the process here that you come and talk to us about this, and we get a good opportunity beforehand to sort of provide input. So thank you very much. Good work, and we look forward to seeing some numbers. See what they look like.
Yeah, look, through the chair, one thing we will do is that we will notify committee members when public consultation starts, so you'll get a chance to see the full numbers before we present them to you on the 14th of August, which is when effectively consultation changes, and it's just, I guess, a factor of when the current audit committee meetings are set versus when we need to go out for, like Mick said, we've got a compressed timeline given that we potentially have caretaker coming on.
Potentially.
Potentially, yes.
All right, that brings us to the end of the reports. Do we need to do anything? I don't know whether we had to do anything else. Do we? Yeah, I'll get to that. Yeah, I'll work through those. Yeah, so that was just for noting that workshop. So thank you. Any emerging key risks that we haven't already talked about? No. Okay. Any independent member discussion? No. Other business, I think it just with a couple of resignations that have happened with the committee very close together, it'd just be good to get an update of the process to go and filling those positions again.
Thank you, Chair, for that question. We have advertised externally for ARC members. That advertisement went live on the 22nd of May and closed on the 8th of June, so just over 2 weeks. We've received 57 applications, which is excellent, so I'm very pleased with that. We are in the process now of shortlisting those, and interviews will commence no later than the week commencing 22nd of June. Those interviews will be undertaken by Anthony, Mitch and myself.
Thank you. So potentially we may have a full complement again by the next meeting, or? Well, we can sort of share this moving and seconding around a bit more, can't we? That's right. All right, well, I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. So, look, thank you, everybody. We'll close the meeting at 10:35. Thank you.